Thanks, listeners, for joining us. Today's edition of Elko Live is our regular feature with Elko County School Superintendent C.J. Anderson. We're getting caught up in local school news and issues. We're actually recording a couple of days in advance to accommodate the superintendent's traveling schedule. And with that, I welcome you, C.J., to the studio here at KELK. And again, just to acknowledge that you do a lot of traveling on behalf of our school district. We're one of 17 school districts throughout the state, and there's a lot of business that's done concurrently, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again for having me, and I appreciate you accommodating the schedule. This go around, I travel lots of different places for many reasons. This one happens to be to go to speak with the interim finance committee in Carson City in a couple days. So, sometimes we get summoned to speak to legislative bodies and committees and things like that. So whether it's a state board of ed meeting or, especially with coming up on the next legislative session, we always anticipate plenty of visits to Carson City in the lead up to a legislative session, and then obviously during the legislative session. So
that's exciting, CJ.
It's hard to believe it's already here again. I felt like we just finished the last session, but here it comes in 2025.
That's right. Interim finance has a lot to do with schools with salaries, important issues like that. Obviously, at the legislative level, school capital funding has been a topic, and it's nice to know that our school superintendent has a seat at the table, along with rural school superintendents throughout the state, because that representation is so important.
Yes, I'll be there with a lot of them, actually. And in this particular case, you mentioned that the Interim Finance Committee has some oversight there. This is in regard to, for those who remember, SB 231, which was a bill that was passed last session in regards to supplementing teacher salaries. And so there's talk and hope that this bill will continue to be funded. This was one that was brought about last session, and the district had to match a certain amount of money in order to be eligible for teachers and other employees to get that salary increase. And so we're kind of going and reporting on how we've done with that and answer any questions, and then we'll see if it gets funded this next time around or not.
We're continuing our discussion with C.J. Anderson. I think the most important topic that we can address today, C.J., because we've seen some chatter on social media, and there are some parents that are concerned about threats made in school or students who may have issues and things both within the classroom and maybe even in the community, C.J., that involve Elko County school students.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that. Probably the most important thing, or the most important way to start off the conversation, is an acknowledgement that the safety and well-being of our students and our staff and really everyone is the first and highest priority that we have. Obviously, we exist to educate, and we provide meals, and we provide other services, and we have sports teams, and there's lots of things we do for our students and with our students. But the number one priority is always safety and security. And so, when it comes to this topic, we are, we've talked about our school violence prevention project that we're engaged in right now to bolster the security and safety of our campuses. So we're kind of always working in the background trying to make our campuses more safe. We have excellent relationship with our SROs to make sure we have police support when we need it. To the topic that you're talking about, when it comes to maybe threats of violence, we've noticed lately, I'd say in the last couple of weeks, there's been a couple situations that have presented themselves, and from my perspective, our administrators have actually done a phenomenal job of handling those situations. I think what probably is happening is there may be a lack of awareness from those outside of school employees about how those situations are handled, and kind of what those processes look like, and how and when those things are communicated. And so I'd be happy to to share as much as I can, or as much as you'd like to talk about that topic, and how we handle those situations.
So what if we just took a social media post, and again, I don't need to name many names, but because someone has put it out on a public source, which is a social media platform, maybe we could dissect it a little bit.
Sure.
So the person has written and posted publicly, I am a parent and my children are still in school. And the concern is if a child threatens to shoot up the school, do you think that the next day they should be able to attend the school with no consequences, especially if they did it 2 times prior? So again, this is not something that we know is factual, but this is a concern that was expressed publicly.
Sure. There's a really good chance that if we're going to read posts like this, I've probably already seen them, and I've seen all the comments and that sort of thing. So to address that specific post, or some of the points brought up in that post. So the very first thing I would say is to number one, be cautious of what we say on social media as adults and as students. When I read that post, I thought to myself, wow, this person may not be trying to spread false information, but by virtue of saying, do you think it's appropriate if a child threatens to shoot up the school? And in that particular situation, there was never a child that threatened to shoot up a school. So that's first something to mention is, now, do I believe that person may have received that information from a child, or maybe from a second or third hand source? Sure, they may have been told by someone else, hey, I heard that a student said they were going to shoot up the school. But in this particular situation, that is not what occurred, at least not in the fashion that they're talking about. So number one, just be careful what information that you share, on whether or not you know it to be true. We've had people say before in our community, I know this to be true, and it was factually incorrect. So I know people talk about their own truth, but there are things that are definitely true. And so if you're not involved firsthand in a situation, we all need to, not you, I need to be careful. Everybody needs to be careful about saying something if they don't know if it's factually correct, which is why it's always good to go to the source of information. In this case, a great source of information for something that's happening at a campus is the site administrator. So a principal or a vice principal who is actively involved in investigating a situation would be a wonderful source of information. And so that would be a great suggestion, is to make sure to talk to those folks. Now, to kind of delve into that question a little more, like should a student who has made a threat be allowed back on campus? It all depends on the nature of the threat, so to speak. To adapt another phrase you've heard before, not all threats are created equal. And so we have I'll just go through, we have a threat assessment and response protocol, and I hope this isn't boring, but it's helpful to know kind of what the process is, right? What I want to start with saying is we don't have school administrators and SROs that just kind of like willy-nilly hear something and deal with it, any which way.
That's why you have protocols, because it's a standard.
Correct. There's a very specific protocol. And in fact, during the summer, every administrator, every counselor, every nurse, every SRO, even every central office administrator, all of us went through the same training for threat assessment and response protocol. In fact, all of our school psychologists were also part of this. It was a very large group of folks that would all be involved. Basically, anyone that could potentially, because the structure of our school sites is so different from place to place. But from a Jackpot to a Grammar Number 2 to an Elko High, our schools have very different positions and kind of supports available. Depending on the site. And so we kind of tried to bring everybody in that could potentially be involved in working through a situation of an alleged threat. And so, yeah, we have something called a threat assessment and response protocol. And as I said, number one, we always we take all threats seriously, whether we try not to make that judgment up front right away of, oh, this, that was just a passing, that they didn't mean that, right? Like we don't just do that. There's a whole procedure that you go through to determine that. And so, a threat, just by way of definition, is a communication of intent to harm someone, whether that's through spoken, written, gestured, or expressed in some other form. Could be through text, through message, through email, digital means. There's a really long paragraph that talks about what constitutes a threat and doesn't. But the very first thing we do, which is step one, is we evaluate the threat. And so that process typically includes obtaining an account of the threat. There's interviews of the person who is alleged to have made the threat. There's interviews of intended victims, other witnesses, finding the exact, if it was in text or if it was in a social media platform or it was verbal. You go through that process and you evaluate the threat. And so, it's kind of like a flow chart. So if we determine, okay, no, that wasn't an actual threat, then that's where it ends. And if the answer is yes, that could be construed as a threat, then you move to the next step. And that next step is step two, which is an attempt to resolve the threat as transient. And what that means is, yes, someone could have made a threat, but transient would mean, was that threat an expression of humor, albeit recognizing that there's nothing funny about it, but was someone attempting to be funny? Was it anger? Was it a threat was it rhetorical? Was it just frustration in the moment? And is there a way to resolve that and determine, and essentially at that point, you're trying to determine, is there real intent to harm, right? Is there remorse? Do they recognize that was a thing that's shouldn't be said? Are there apologies attached to it? Or, basically, can you resolve that threat as something that is transient? And if that is the case where it is transient, then it kind of stops there as far as the threat assessment process goes. But then it kind of moves off in another direction where now you provide services and supports to the student and to maybe anyone who is impacted at that point. And so taking a pause from the steps here, going back to the post we talked about, something that I saw both in that post and in other comments was, and this happens with lots of discipline or other situations that we look into, people will say things like, nothing happened, or, it wasn't taken seriously. And something that's very important to know about FERPA, which is it's one of the federal acts that guides almost everything we do in schools.
It's privacy.
It's privacy. Mm-hmm. I would say 99 to 100% of the time when someone says nothing has happened, I would amend that statement to say nothing has happened that was any of your business. That is any of their business. Right?
Absolutely.
Because in a situation where we investigate a threat with a student, right? So let's say in this situation at step 2, we determined, okay, it was a transient threat. There are many things that can occur, and having a conference with a student and a parent is doing something. That's not nothing. Giving a discipline consequence to a student is not doing nothing. That is something. Having an interview with a police officer is not doing nothing. That is something. Having a search of someone's home, an invasion of their home privacy, because
that's a big deal.
That is a big something. Mm-hmm. And so what I'm trying to say is, just because you see a student again after a threat has happened, it doesn't matter if it was the next day or 2 days later or 6 months later. because they're at school, so they have a right to be at school as well. And as if we've determined that, through doing these other things that you may not be aware of, that is both resolving the threat as transient, but is also protecting that student's right to FERPA, and is also providing FAPE, which is another federal requirement of all schools. It's a free and appropriate public education. If we've determined that by doing these supports that any of the ones that I mentioned, and I'm not saying all or any combination, I'm just giving examples of things that could be done, right? By doing those things, those are all something, and it's not doing nothing. And I think people sometimes incorrectly assert that, well, if there was a threat made and that child is not expelled from school, then it wasn't taken seriously. And that's just, it's factually incorrect. There are many things that are done, and it was absolutely taken seriously. And the reason that we have this protocol is to remove emotion, to remove difference of opinion, to remove people's varying senses of justice from situations, because those are all subjective, and a protocol is not really subjective. A protocol tells you exactly how to proceed, and if X is true, then you go this direction, and if X is not true, then you go this direction.
Based on facts.
Based on facts, yes. And so, and sometimes when parents definitely should talk to their kids about what's going on, but parents should also understand that maybe the story they're getting that comes home from their student could be hyperbole, it could be ill-informed, it could be the result of a game of telephone from one friend to another friend to another friend about what they heard, and now it's making it your way. And so if you get information that feels alarming to you, well, feel free to
call the
school and speak with the site administrator about it. And if you get a communication home, like in this situation, I think the situation that we're talking about, there was a communication that was sent home through our school messenger, through Infinite Campus, and it essentially acknowledged that there were reports of a threat made, that there was determined to not be a credible threat, and that your students are safe at school.
Right.
That means a lot of stuff happened before that communication went out. It means that tons of interviews went on. It means police involvement had occurred. It means a ton of things, and so we follow that protocol. We determine whether or not there is a threat, if it's a transient threat, or if it's so the other type of threat if it's not determined to be transient, the term we use, and this would be a move to step 3, is that it would be a substantive threat. And a substantive threat would be like would mean that there is a serious concern
Maybe
here.
Weapons were found.
Yes, there could be weapons. There could have been evidence of planning. There could have been means to commit that thing. Basically it was upon investigation that it was determined that it could be either a serious threat, which would require significantly more intervention and services, and then there's even actually even a difference between a serious substantive threat and a very serious substantive threat. There are differences there. A serious substantive threat could be, I'm gonna beat you up, and there's this evidence that they plan on doing it. They've rallied the phones to come record it, right? Like there's a threat there. A very serious threat would be something a little more widespread. In the case of if you wanted to talk about shoot up the school, that would be considered a very serious threat if determined to be substantive. There is such thing as a threat to shoot up the school that is actually a transient threat. And I know we're parsing words here, like it's still a threat, but the way that situation is handled is going to be very different, because a student could say something like, man, someone should just shoot up the school, right? Like they've used the word shoot up the school, and that could be perceived as a threat by someone. But an investigation into that might say, well, yeah, they said that, and that was an ill-advised thing to say. But but there is no evidence that there was a plan. There is no evidence of access to weapons. There is no history of anything that would indicate that. And so we're going to go and handle that in a transient direction. And again, that doesn't mean nothing. But what it means is we're now going to go ahead and handle that situation. But if there isn't a substantive threat, or if there isn't something that means people are in imminent danger, the other thing we have to consider is to what extent do we communicate that to everybody. Sometimes I know it's good to have communication, but sometimes excessive communication can raise alarms and red flags to where something doesn't exist, where there isn't an actual widespread problem. And so I know that's frustrating for some people too, is, hey, we heard someone said they were going to shoot up the school. Why weren't all the parents informed?
Right.
And the reality may be, not only was there never a threat to shoot up the school, which means it wasn't a widespread threat, it may have been a comment made to one or two people.
It wasn't a consequential threat, right?
It was not substantive,
right.
and it wasn't something that would impact the whole school. So we're not going to inform the parents of 700 kids about something that was maybe a threat that was made to one or two kids. You handle that situation with those people.
It's sort of a FOMO, if you will, of some people that are living in a different time, where they feel like they need access to all the information all the time about everything that's going on. And that's simply not a healthy way to live. And so by you describing this protocol, hopefully that is helpful to people listening to understand that these things are assessed and they are taken seriously. If we could go a different direction just for a minute.
Sure.
Because there was also in this post concern for the welfare of the child. Because again, we are dealing with children. No matter the age, if they are under 18, they are considered, children, teenagers, adolescents, grade school children. They're being evaluated. So what about the phrase cry for help? Are we responding to students who are making casual threats, or, what can the school district do to respond to those students?
Yeah, of course. And this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier of doing something versus doing nothing. What is being done to help this student, again, falls under the none of anyone's business category. And I'm not trying to be, snarky or anything with saying that.
No, it's true, though. Would you want your child's...
Absolutely not.
Right.
No. If I have a child who's undergoing counseling or is undergoing therapy, or who, because of something that happened at school is, has like court-ordered whatever, right? Like that's all very private business here, and it shouldn't be something that everyone is made aware of.
And you shouldn't ostracize a student, or an adult for that matter, who is working on these issues and receiving counseling, by removing them from, if it's deemed that they're safe and that the environment is safe.
And so similar to how, I guess it's not really similar, but there are students, I'll say it this way, there are students at schools everywhere, in our district and almost every school everywhere, that need certain accommodations or supports in order to gain access to FAPE, to that free and appropriate public education, and to try to have equitable access to be successful in school. And while for one student who has an IEP, that might mean certain accommodations. In this case, that could be a student who has needs for counseling, who has needs for additional support, who has needs for like a safety plan that would monitor how they're doing and have check-ins with counselors. There are all these things that could be and are in place for such a student.
That's an IEP, as an individualized education plan?
Yeah, so an IEP, I apologize, thank you, is individualized education plan. We also have plans that are 504 plans. We also just have safety plans. There are any number of different individualized supports that our students get depending on what they need in order to have equitable access to education.
And these are not just public school students within the Elko County School District. These are students everywhere. These could be homeschooled students. These could be charter school students, private school students. All students are entitled to these plans and protections. And truthfully, it should not be anybody's business what plan somebody is on.
Yeah, that's all very private, and just if I were to tell you right now in that situation what happened with that student and what supports they're receiving, I would be violating multiple aspects of FERPA, and my license would be at jeopardy, right? Like we're not allowed by law to communicate exactly what things have been done. And the same thing applies to if a discipline concept, like if, let's say, a student violated something in our restorative behavior matrix. If we were to say, oh, well, that student had this happen to them and they've been suspended for this many days, like that would all be a violation of FERPA and be in serious trouble, right? So it is their right, as much as people want to know information. And I get that. We live in a digital age where you can find out almost anything you want to find out, even if it's totally incorrect. You can find it out if you want to find it out, and we can get information.
It's in the palm of your hand.
Yep.
Yes.
We can I was reviewing something on social media this morning, and some of the stuff that I saw in the comments, I'm like, these people just they don't know what they're talking about. They think they know, but they don't know, and that's why I kind of started this all off with. It's so important to just make sure you know what information you're sharing. I will say, in the same comment thread, I saw multiple people that said things like, hey, you should schedule a meeting to sit down with the principal. Amazing advice. Hey, you should ask this question. It's amazing advice. I love that. And I think most reasonable people do think that way of, hey, I may not know the whole story here, and I should ask a question. And I find I'm in that situation all the time. I have people, whether it's board members or administrators or parents, who say, hey, Mr. Anderson, what's going on with this situation? I heard da 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 da, and they fill me in on the story they heard. And almost always my first answer is, I'm going to need to check in with the administrator on that situation and see what I know about what I can find out about what happened there. Because I can't just trust, as much as I believe a board member to be a reasonable and intelligent person, the information they got could be incorrect. It could also be 100% correct, but I'm not going to give an answer, and I'm not going to make a determination based on something that I'm just hearing from someone. I always make sure I say, and people, my friends, even my spouse, like everyone has told me something, and almost always my answer is, let me look into that a little more. Let me find out the answer to that, because I don't know every situation that's going on at every school. And I feel like it's my obligation. Not only, I mean, this is my job, and so it's important that I do it the right way and I get accurate information. But even if you're not employed and you're not the superintendent, I think we all have an obligation to make sure not to spread misinformation. And I think that, I'm not saying I'm innocent of having ever done this. I probably do it in my personal life, and we're all prone to. It is nice to know information, and there's something satisfying, I think, in the human psyche about knowing what's going on and being involved and having some input to give. Because that's how we connect. We tell stories, we share perspectives, that kind of thing. And that can be healthy, but when what you're sharing and what you're communicating is potentially incorrect, or even worse, if it's knowingly incorrect, that's even more egregious. But it's so important that we all make sure we know what we're saying before we say it, because otherwise you could be creating a firestorm for something that doesn't exist.
Being very harmful. So I would kind of wrap up this part of the conversation, just because I know we are closing in on the end of the program, but you could apply this simple 4-way test in Rotary. In Rotary Club, there's a set of guiding principles Rotarians use as a foundation for actions and relationships. So this is something to keep in mind before you rush to post, right? Is it the truth? That's the first in the 4-way test. Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? And will it be beneficial to all concerned? I mean, maybe that's sort of a goody two-shoes way to look at it, but honestly, it's just a little test and balance that you could ask yourself just the first question: is this the truth? And if if it's not the truth, like you said, the phone call to the site administrator, they'd probably appreciate that much more than trying to deal with, as you said, this firestorm that goes out on social media.
Yeah. And there's really only a couple ways to know something is true. And so if you weren't there, if you didn't see it, if you didn't hear it, if you're just getting stuff second, third hand, there's a really good chance you don't know the truth. Like, it's a really high probability that you don't know the truth. And so it's important to, if you just feel like you have to know, then ask those questions and go to the source of the information. And that's going to be the administrators at the school site. And I guess if we're wrapping up, I just want to bring it back around to there is nothing flippant about the way we handle these situations. It worries me that people think that we might just, I saw such comments as, "Oh, this will get swept under the carpet." Like, there's no such thing that happens with threats. All threats, I know this to be true. All threats are taken seriously. And I know in the situation that post was about, as well as another one that happened about a week previous, extensive steps were taken in both situations to make sure that we felt really good about the resolution we came to. People don't have to agree with that. Again, people have different senses of what's right and what's wrong, and what is the just thing to do, and that's not a decision they get to make. That is a decision that our professionals make, but it is made based off of a lot of research, a lot of work, a lot of collaboration, and this wasn't any one person doing anything. This situation, again, that the post was about, involved probably half a dozen administrators who were looking into all the aspects of that to make sure we're safe. And so it's so important to know that we take it all very seriously, and we appreciate tips that are sent in. We appreciate when people report things that they're concerned about. We discourage spreading of rumors. We discourage taunting and harassing of people because of something you heard. It's really important that we treat everyone with kindness. And if you have questions, it's okay to ask those questions. And encourage people to do that in a respectful and responsible way.
CJ Anderson is our school superintendent. We appreciate the time, CJ. It's an ongoing topic, and it's something that we were happy to dedicate this amount of time to, as it will encourage a healthier community for all of us. So thank you.
Of course, anytime.